It is day 23 of the shutdown, and the Trump administration is planning to release more than $3 billion of frozen aid to U.S. farmers. The president directing the Department of Agriculture to use money from a fund that bailed out farmers during his first term. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the USDA will reopen some county offices to distribute that aid. The Journal adding, quote, farmers around the country are struggling to make a profit. They're in the midst of harvesting one of the largest corn and soybean crops in history, fueling a glut that is driving down prices. Rising costs for fertilizer and farm equipment also squeezing their balance sheets. I want to bring in U.S. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins. Secretary, good morning to you, and I wanted to get your reaction to that.
Yeah, good morning. Well, listen, we are on day 23 of the Schumer shutdown. The Senate has now voted 11 times to open the government. The Republicans have, with a couple of Democrats who are the same Democrats. And yet the Schumer team continues to put funding for illegal aliens. I think there's some of their requests are funding for LGBTQI programs in the Balkans. It is absolutely insane. But the president continues to be very focused on ensuring that we can make this as painless as possible as we work to get the government open. So just a couple of days ago, we made the announcement we're reopening all 2,100 of our Farm Service Agency offices in all of the counties around the country. This is how we distribute these commitments to our farmers in America. And these are commitments that were made earlier this year for farmers for disaster relief, for wildfire relief, et cetera, that we have to get out so that they can make their payments to continue planning for their next season, which begins pretty quickly.
You say that you're going to be reopening these offices. Are you going to be paying the employees then?
Yes, in this instance, we're able to pay the employees because of the certain category of funding that our OMB director, Russ Vogt, and his team have been wonderful working with our team. It's incredibly complicated, but as the president has made a priority to, at least for the short term, continue funding programs like WIC and food stamps or SNAP, our military officers, some of our law enforcement, and now ensuring that our agriculture community, again, it's national security. If these farmers can't plant for next season, we will have a food supply chain issue, and that's what we're working to ensure. Not only we're supporting the farmers and our ag industry, but also ensuring that we have what we need as a country in terms of our food supply.
And I love supporting the soybean farmers who have been really under so much pressure this year because of what China has been doing to the United States. And I know that President Trump is going to be, of course, on his way to Asia, and hopefully that will come up, the fact that China has not kept their commitments to this nation. I've got to ask you about beef prices, because President Trump is looking for ways, obviously, to lower record-high beef prices, including a proposal that would import more tariff-free meat from Argentina. Now, this is causing some concern and some pushback from some American farmers. And the president did take Truth Social. Here's what he wrote. The cattle ranchers, who I love, don't understand that the only reason they're doing so well for the first time in decades is because I put tariffs on cattle coming into the U.S., including a 50% tariff on Brazil. They also have to get their prices down because the consumer is a very big factor in my thinking also. Now, your department announcing its plan for American ranchers and consumers, just yesterday, which is to rebuild the U.S. cattle herd. And lower prices, but Secretary, you hear from some of these small ranchers, these small cattle producers in places like Oklahoma, for example, that say that there's a bigger problem that they've got. It's not even just about the imports of the Argentine beef. That would hurt them, but then they're saying that they're struggling with the cost that they're dealing with on their small production farms. How do you address those folks?
Yeah, a couple of different points on this I think are really important. The first is that this president, when he ran and cast his vision, well over the last almost 10 years now, which is hard to believe, but certainly over the last year as he was running in 2024, was many promises, but top of the list was securing the border, and he's done that pretty remarkably. And number two was making America more affordable again, that under Joe Biden, everything, that inflation, fuel, groceries, everything had just skyrocketed. Eggs, I know we talked about on this show a lot at the beginning of the year. And so he is very, very focused on what he needs to do to check that box for the American people to make sure that they can afford the sort of life that they want to provide for their family. So that's first. But second, as the president mentioned, and he has said over and over and over again, He loves our farmers and our ranchers. He innately understands how important they are, not just to feeding and fueling our country and frankly the world, but also to the very fabric of this nation, the sort of that frontier, independent, hardworking spirit that they have. That is the best of America. That is from 250 years ago, and they represent that better than probably anybody else in the world. So ensuring that he can support the farmers and ranchers, certainly in the beef cattle industries that we're talking about now, and the consumer, these are not mutually exclusive goals. They can work together, but there is frustration on both sides. And I was with the president yesterday, and he is very, very frustrated because everything he's done to cut taxes, to bring down costs. And you think about the last administration, they were working to get cattle off the lands. They didn't like cattle. They're worried about climate change and methane emissions from our cattle industry. And this president has worked so hard. Having said all of that, the plan that we released yesterday, which the president was so excited about, we were opening up 5 million acres of taxpayer land, BLM and Forest Service land, for our ranchers to lease from the government. We're implementing new programs to allow younger ranchers to get into the business with cheaper loans, better protection, et cetera. We are with Newton Maha, with Bobby Kennedy, and putting protein, specifically beef, back at the center of the American diet from the government's perspective. And when you think about what we spend every day on nutrition programs from the USDA, it's $400 million a day, pivoting some of that to specifically locally grown and produced and healthy, the best beef in the world. And then in opening up our processing plants, having smaller processing plants around the country, that'll bring costs way down for our producers. And then finally, and probably I'm most excited about this, is labeling product of the USA for our American born, raised, and slaughtered beef. All of this is going to support the rebuild of the industry, ultimately resulting in lower costs for the consumer, and hopefully, again, a more prosperous and more sustainable reliance for everyone.
Well, I think, and I think, by the way, as a granddaughter of a meat processor, music to my ears, but I think to the industry's ears, because right now we're looking at the cattle population in the U.S. I mean, we're at lows we haven't seen since the 1950s.
That's right. And that's what we have to rebuild. And there's a lot of reasons for that. As I mentioned, the Joe Biden era of frankly not wanting cattle, decreasing the lands out in the West that were available to raise the cattle, et cetera. We had major drought over the last few years that we're still making sure we can get in. We've closed the ports because of the screwworm, which is another conversation for another show, but closed the ports down south. And what that has resulted in is the smallest herd, which is, again, supply and demand has increased the cost. But at the end of the day, this president could not be more focused on ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And this Argentina piece, let me just say a quick thing about that. Currently, Americans consume 12 million metric tons of beef. 10 million we produce in this country. 2 million we import. And this is not a new thing. We have long imported the ground beef, sort of the leaner cuts for American consumers. So 12 million total. The Argentinian piece is only about currently 20,000 under a tariff quota. The president has mentioned up to 100,000 out of 12 million. That would be 20,000 every quarter. This is not a massive influx in the millions of tons, I think, that some have thought of beef from Argentina. So again, it is an important, strategic, intentional move out. As we deregulate for the market, we bring new and younger ranchers in. We label product of the USA. We open up lands out in the West. We keep the screwworm out of America, and we begin to rebuild this herd for all Americans.
Secretary Brooke Rollins, it's also always, a pleasure to speak with you. Really appreciate the work. And I'm so glad you're focusing on American farmers. We really appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.